Hey, what is up guys, it is Orbin Hardware, and in today's video we're gonna build the best budget $1,000 gaming and streaming PC for March 2021, and we're gonna use the following parts. Now I'm gonna run you guys through the entire build process step by step, how to put this PC build together. Then we're gonna test it out in a bunch of popular games in both 1080p max settings but also at 1440p resolution while streaming. We're also gonna take a look at what kind of frame rate you can expect, having ray tracing turned on as well. Now if you want to build this PC too, all PC parts I'm using are linked up down below. Before we get into the video, hey, my name is Robin, and on this channel I turn you into a PC builder expert, and so if that is something you're interested in, smash the like button down below for the YouTube algorithm and hit the subscribe and notification bell, and let me know what price target we should cover in upcoming videos. And speaking of pricing, this machine will cost you right about $1,000 using the listed parts. Now at this budget you will be able to play every game out there at 1080p at max settings and 1440p at high settings with respectable frame rate, but even 4K gaming at low settings is also certainly possible. Taking a sneak peek at the performance shows that we're able to run most games tested with highest graphics preset at 60 FPS. But we're gonna dive into the gaming performance in much greater detail after we completed the build. Anyway, inside this machine we find a 5th gen 6-core Ryzen, an RTX 3060 graphics card, as well as a super fast M.2 drive, 16 gigs of RAM, everything housed inside a sleek and high airflow Fantex case. So let's get started with the base of today's build, the CPU, RAM and motherboard, and for today's build I ended up picking the Gigabyte B450M DS3H, coming in at just $94, which makes it one of the cheapest B550s you can buy right now. And what I especially like with this board, despite its low price tag, is that you're really not sacrificing any valuable features. You got everything you need here for a future-proof gaming PC build. By spending less money on the motherboard will allow us to get away with a better graphics card and a better CPU, with less stutter and higher frame rate when gaming and streaming. Alright, so let's go ahead and install our processor, and for today's build I've gone for the Ryzen 5 5600X, coming in at $299. Now this is a 6-core CPU with SMT, which means that it got 12 threads with a base clock of 3.7 and 4.6 GHz turbo. Now having a look at the gaming performance, the CPU gaming performance, we see that the Ryzen 5600X is a very compelling CPU, and in some cases beating even Intel's most expensive picks out there. And this is much thanks to the underlying core improvements of the Zen 3's architecture. As we can see, our motherboard comes with a retention frame pre-installed. Since we're gonna use a cooler with springs, we're gonna have to get rid of the retention frame. Installing the processor in the socket is easy. First up, you wanna open the metal arm. Secondly, you wanna locate what's looking like a golden triangle on the processor, and we find this triangle printed on the motherboard socket as well. And so what you want to do is you simply want to turn the CPU so that these triangles match up. Then you simply drop the processor into the socket and gently move the metal arm all the way down until it locks in place and our CPU is installed. Inside the CPU box also comes an included heatsink, and the included stock cooler is actually really not that bad if you aren't interested in doing, any heavy overclocking, and I actually don't see any reason not to use it, as it will save us a couple of dollars. Now before you freak out over my high temperatures when gaming, AMD have actually told us that seeing upwards of 95C on the CPU is expected and by design. That all being said, I like my system cooler if possible, and so I downloaded Ryzen Master, and by selecting Profile 1, selecting Manual, and by putting the peak voltage at 1.2, I was able to lower the temperatures by about 10 degrees. Now the cooler installment is pretty simple. Position the CPU cooler so that the 4 spring screws on the heatsink align with the 4 holes on the backplate. Once aligned, carefully place the heatsink onto the CPU. Turn each spring screw half a turn clockwise to ensure the spring screw makes a connection with the backplate. Then follow a diagonal pattern across the CPU cooler to further tightening each spring screw with a full turn. And with all 4 spring screws connected to the backplate, tighten them until you feel resistance. Lastly, don't forget to connect the fan power cable to the CPU cooler to the CPU fan header on the motherboard. For our system memory, we're gonna go with this black Corsair Vengeance kit coming in at around $85 with a rated speed of 3200 MHz. And so with these we are hitting the so-called sweet spot for the Ryzen CPU, and it happens to be that the faster clock RAM kit will give you a frame rate boost compared to a slower clock kit, as we can see, and this is because of the way that the CPU and RAM communicate with each other. Installing these bad boys is as simple as it looks. You're gonna want to populate the gray slot, so simply pull back the toggle for the second and the for dim slot and plug them in just like so. So let's go ahead and install our super speed storage device. And this one got 500 GB of storage, so we want to locate the M.2 slot, which we find right here. And so what you want to do is you want to loosen this tiny screw just like so, then gently slide the M.2 unit into the socket with this little notch you see here, located on the opposite side of the CPU cooler just like so. Now we can go ahead and move our whole base of our build and install it in our case. And in this build I ended up picking the Fantex Eclipse P300A for $60. Now a single 120mm fan comes included, and you can install up to 2 additional ones at the front and another one at the top. Thanks to this perforated front to double team as a dust filter, we're looking at a cheap case with excellent cooling potential, and thanks to the tempered glass side window we can take a look at our beautiful system whenever we want to. Now in order to get access to the interior of the case, all we need to do is untie these 2 thumb screws and remove the tempered glass side window. Next we're gonna install our IO shield that we find inside our motherboard box, and this one goes in from the back of the case with these circular audio ports located at the bottom. Now with the CPU cooler installed, we can just grab onto the CPU fan and slide the whole assembly into place. And we're gonna use the screws that comes provided by Fantex, and with the board installed before we move on to power supply and graphics, now is a good time to connect the chassis cables that takes care of the front audio and USB. Let's start with USB 3, and this is what the cable looks like. The connector is located down at the bottom of the motherboard. Next in line we have the front audio, and this cable goes to the left side corner. Lastly we have the front panel connectors, and you find these on the lower right side. With that done, let's go ahead and install our power supply, and I chose this 550 watt unit from Corsair. For being a 550 watt unit, it is fairly compact, and with 80 plus bronze efficiency certification for $58, I think this is a solid buy. Now make sure you got the fan facing downwards, then gently slide it into place and secure it. Now we're gonna do a couple of cables and wiring before installing our graphics, and first up we got the 24-pin power for our motherboard, and this one goes to a connector on the mid right side. Next in line we have the 8-pin power for our CPU, and this one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. Time to install our graphics guys, and for today's build we find the brand new Ampere based RTX 3060, this one specifically from Gigabyte. This is their Eagle variant, which is using a slightly thinner cooler than some other 3060 options we've seen. Now the 3060 is based on the brand new GA106 GPU. It's got plenty of cooldown ray tracing cores with enough power to run most games at 1080p max settings and 1440p at medium to high settings. Now in terms of specifications, it comes with 12GB of G6 memory, and looking at its performance then against other popular picks, we see that the 3060 holds up great with performance matching the good old RTX 2070 Super. The MSRP for this graphics card is $329, and this is what I think the card is worth. However, because of low supply and high demand, prices on GPUs are broken right now, to say the least. I don't recommend spending much more than $350 to $370. Anyway, plug in the graphics card and take these 2 PCIe cables and plug them into our graphics card just like so. And what is left to do is to flip the case around, whack on the side panel, and we have officially completed our $1,000 gaming and streaming PC build. Let's fire up some games and look at what kind of performance we can expect when streaming. So on your screen now we are looking at the performance numbers that I've gathered from today's build, and I ended up running 15 games in both 1080p and 1440p resolution, and overall I am quite impressed with the performance you can expect for these kind of money. Although again, if you can find the 3060 for $350, right? Anyway, let's dive a bit deeper with some of the games tested, and first let's have a look at what frame rates you can expect running Call of Duty Warzone while streaming. So let's start having a look at the frame rate while not streaming. Let's start with 1080p max settings, and the result is about 88 to 92 FPS on average, and this is with ray tracing turned off. At 1440p we're seeing about 83 FPS. Starting up a stream on Discord does have a slight impact on the performance, but we're only talking about 5 to 10 FPS at most. And here is a side-by-side comparison. Can you notice any difference between the two? Share your thoughts down below. Let's move on and take a look at Death Stranding, starting with 1080p with an average of 120 FPS with 1% low at around 90 FPS. Running at max settings, you can expect silky smooth frame rate with this PC. Jumping to 1440p, same settings, we're seeing around 85 to 90 FPS, and if you turn on deep learning super sampling, you can expect to see 100 FPS and more. Moving on to CSGO, once again we're starting with 1080p and I'm going with competitive settings, results in about 520 FPS on average. Jumping to 1440p at same graphic settings, results in about 420 FPS. Doom Eternal is next, and once again I am picking the highest possible settings. Running at 1080p results in about 170 FPS. At 1440p we saw 110 FPS on average using the Ultra Nightmare graphic settings. Moving to Overwatch, and I'm picking Ultra settings for this title, and this results in about 150 FPS. At 1440p we're still averaging around 118 FPS and 95 FPS using the Epic settings once again. Valorant also runs incredibly well with an average of over 275 FPS, and looking at the settings I went for everything maxed out at 1080p. At 1440p things didn't change much and we're still almost at 270 FPS on average. Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing activated using the medium ray tracing settings resulted in around 55 to 60 FPS on average, whereas in 1440p with ray tracing set to medium, and thanks to deep learning super sampling at ultra performance we were able to reach 65 FPS on average, which is pretty impressive. Once again guys, all PC components can be found down below. Exciting news, we now have an official Discord server up and running, and if you want to become a part of the community, ask questions either to me or any other awesome people on this channel, you want to go ahead and join the Discord server today. Link can be found down below. Now watch either of these two videos and I will see you guys in the next video.